The corridor slammed into me before I saw it. Or I slammed into it. The distinction felt important for about half a second, which was how long it took me to hit the floor, scatter my entire orientation packet across 3 meters of polished academy deck, and make a sound that I will describe only as involuntary and leave it there. My pens rolled everywhere. My glorious, color-coded, labeled by subject pens that I had packed from Kepler Colony 7 in a case that had survived 2 atmospheric re-entries and 1 very aggressive cargo handler named Dale. Rolling, freely, into the boots of approximately 40 cadets who did not break stride. I stared at them, the pens, not the cadets. You focus on what you can save. I was on my knees, collecting a green marker when the corridor spoke to me. You are on the floor. I looked up. The wall I had walked into was not a wall. It was warm, which walls in pressurized stations generally are, but this warmth came with a pulse, and height, and a pair of compound eyes the color of deep-water amber, set into a face that was all sharp geometric planes and exoskeletal ridging that caught the overhead light like polished stone. Keldris, 7 feet if it was an inch. The rank crest along its collar structure glowed a steady, unbothered blue. I had read about Keldris. I had studied the xenobiology file on the transit ship for 11 days. I had taken notes. None of the notes covered what to do when you were on your knees in front of one, holding a green pen. I noticed, I said, about the floor. The Keldris looked at me the way you look at something you stepped in and are not sure yet is worth cleaning off. Then it looked at my collar patch, the small one, the one with the colony designation and the little blue-green sphere that marked me as Earth System born. Dirt Worlder. It did not say the word. It did not have to. The 2 seconds it spent on that patch said everything that needed saying, in a language older than any translator matrix. Then it stepped around me and walked away. I sat on the floor of the Varox Military Academy for 3 more seconds, pens in hand, watching it go. Its name, I would learn by end of day, was Vale, 3rd-year cadet, top of the combat track ranking. The kind of student that academies build monuments to before the student has technically done anything monument-worthy, because the monument feels inevitable and everyone wants credit for having seen it coming. I filed that away. I file everything away. It is, genuinely, the only thing I am fast at. My name is Clara Fenn. I am 19 years old. I am from Kepler Colony 7, which is 3 relay jumps from Earth and 1 relay jump from a debris field that used to be a colony called Kepler 4, which is a thing we do not talk about on Kepler 7, but which every single one of us has memorized like a prayer. I received the Varox Academy's first ever Frontier Scholarship, which sounds impressive until you learn that the Frontier Scholarship did not exist until 8 weeks before I received it, and that I was its only applicant because no one on any of the colonies had been told it existed until 8 weeks before I received it. I thought about that on the transit ship for 11 days. I stopped thinking about it when the academy came into visual range because it was enormous and beautiful, and I needed the emotion of it to keep moving. Varox Military Academy occupied a station the size of a small moon in the Caldris system, neutral territory, claimed by no single government and funded by all of them. It had been training officers for the Interstellar Coalition for 60 years. It had admitted human cadets for 3. We were, as a species, on probation. I was, as an individual, alone. There were 11 other humans in the first-year intake. I had checked the manifest on the transit ship. None of them were from the colonies. All of them were from Earth proper or from Mars, which has been settled long enough that Martians do not consider themselves settlers anymore, and will tell you so at length if you give them an opening. I did not give them openings. I ate my meals at off-peak hours, and I read my xenobiology files, and I labeled my pens. Orientation took 4 hours and covered things I already knew from the files, and one thing I did not. which was that my assigned unit for the combat track was Unit 6, and that Unit 6 had 12 cadets, and that I was the only human in it. The other 11 were 3 Keldris, 2 Thune, a pair of Myrathi twins who appeared to share a sentence between them and were fine with that arrangement, 1 Vessi whose species I had to look up twice because the file was filed under a name that had 11 consonants in a row, and 2 others I did not get names for in the first hour because they came in late and sat at the far end of the unit bench and radiated the universal energy of people who have already decided how this is going to go. Vale was one of the 3 Keldris. He sat at the front of the bench, crestlight a steady and confident blue, and he did not look at me when I sat down. He did not look at me when the unit commander ran through the combat schedule. He did not look at me when my name was called for the sparring roster. But I felt the quality of his not looking the way you feel a pressure change before a storm. My name was 3rd from the bottom of the sparring list. His was 3rd from the top. I read the schedule twice, folded it, tucked it into my orientation packet next to the pen case. So sat down next to me. So was Thune, which meant he was wide through the shoulders and moved like he was constantly recalculating his relationship to gravity, which, given that Thune home gravity was 1.4 standard, was probably accurate. He was young. Not young in the sense of age, but young in the sense of a face that had not yet decided how to hold itself in unfamiliar rooms. I recognized it. I had worn the same face since docking. He looked at the sparring schedule in my hand, looked at my name, looked at his own, which was 4th from the bottom. "You are human," he said. His translator gave his voice a slight harmonic doubling that was not unpleasant. "I am. I have not met one before, in person." "We are," I said, "largely what the files suggest." He considered this seriously, which I appreciated. "The files say humans are fragile." "The files are not wrong." He nodded, looked at the schedule again, at Vale's name near the top and our names near the bottom and the mathematics of the distance between them. "Are you afraid?" he asked. I thought about the honest answer, which was layered and complicated and would take more words than I had right now. "I'm focused," I said instead. He accepted that. We sat in silence for the rest of orientation, which was, in its way, the beginning of the only real friendship I made at Varox Academy, and I want to be clear that I am not sentimental about this. I am statting it as data. Everything worth knowing, I learned by watching. Everything worth surviving, I learned by not looking away. The schedule said sparring began in 6 days. I had 6 days to watch every cadet in Unit 6 move, react, compensate, and show me the 10,000 small things that bodies do when they are not paying attention to being watched. 6 days. I uncapped the green pen. I started a new page in my notebook, which I had labeled on the colony bus to the transit port in my neatest handwriting. Field Observations, Varox Academy, Year 1. I wrote the date at the top. I wrote Vale's name first. Then I wrote everything I had already noticed in 4 hours about how he held his left shoulder a half degree lower than his right when he was listening to someone he found uninteresting. It was not much. It was a start. I have always been better at starts than anyone gives me credit for. On Kepler Colony 7, where the growing season is short and the winters are the kind that make decisions for you, you learn that the only thing that matters about a start is that you do not stop. I did not plan to stop. I wrote until the lights in the orientation hall dimmed to evening cycle, and then I capped my pen and put it away, and I went to find my bunk in the unit quarters, and I lay on top of the blanket in my uniform because it was too early to sleep, and I was not ready to be still yet. Through the viewport above my bunk, the Cauldron system spread out in every direction, indifferent and enormous, full of stars that did not care what I was. I have always found that comforting. The stars on Kepler 7 looked the same. The debris field that used to be Kepler-4 was visible on clear nights, a smear of faint light at the edge of the horizon, and we would look at it the way you look at something that was supposed to be a warning but came too late to warn anyone. We looked at it so we would not forget what it cost to be underestimated. I was not going to forget. The sparring schedule was 6 days away. I closed my eyes. I started memorizing Vale's shoulder. Training at Varox Academy began at 500 Standard Time, and it began without ceremony, which I respected. There was no speech, no commander standing at the front of the hall explaining what the next weeks would build in us. The lights came on. The doors to the physical training complex opened. If you were not already on your feet, you were already behind. I was already on my feet. I had been on my feet since 4:30, sitting at the small desk in my bunk alcove with my notebook open and my field observations from day 1 spread out across 2 pages. 14 entries. 14 things I had clocked about the cadets of Unit 6 in 4 hours of orientation. The way one of the Myrathi twins favored her right side when standing at rest. The way the late-arriving Keldris, whose name turned out to be Dren, ground the ridges of his jaw when the unit commander spoke. The way Vale breathed, slow, deliberate, controlled, in the specific pattern of someone who had been taught breath discipline young and never questioned why. I wrote it all down. I wrote it down the way my grandmother cataloged the colony's seed stock every autumn, not because she expected a disaster, but because when disaster came anyway, you wanted the record. Kepler-4 had not kept records. Kepler-7 kept records. The first training session was physical conditioning, and I will say this plainly, I lost. Not at one thing, at all of the things. The Keldris ran the endurance circuit at a pace that my legs classified as an aspiration. The Thune, so included, hit the resistance stations with a casual efficiency that suggested the weights had been calibrated for species with home gravity higher than Earth standard. The Myrathi twins moved through the agility course in a way that stopped being athletic and started being architectural. I ran the circuit, I hit the stations, I finished the agility course. I was last on every single measure, and I want to be precise about something. I was not last by a little. I was last by the kind of margin that makes instructors check the intake manifest to confirm a data entry error. There was no data entry error. Cadet Fen Clara, Kepler Colony 7, human, standard grade biological metrics across the board. The unit conditioning instructor was a Vessi named Arath who had 4 arms and the general demeanor of someone who had been correcting mistakes for so long that disappointment had cured into something more like weather. He looked at my times on the first circuit and said nothing. He looked at my times on the second circuit and said nothing. At the end of the session, when I was the last one standing at the cooldown line, still breathing harder than I wanted to be, he walked past me and said one thing. Adjust your foot strike on the turns. You are losing a full second. He did not say it with encouragement. He did not say it with dismissal. He said it the way you note a calibration error in a machine you are not sure yet has a purpose. I noted it in my book that evening. Foot strike. 1 second per turn, 4 turns per circuit, 4 seconds per lap that I did not have to lose. 4 seconds is nothing. 4 seconds is everything if you run long enough. The sparring session started on day 3, not day 6. The schedule had been moved up, which the unit commander announced in the flat tone of someone who had made this change before and knew what it produced. He did not explain why. He did not have to. The cadets who had sparred before, which was everyone in the unit except me, exchanged the specific kind of look that means. Now we see what the new one is made of. I was the new one. I was made of data and stubbornness, but that is not something you can show in a combat ring. You have to show it across time, and time was the one thing I had in abundance because I was not going anywhere. Kepler Colony 7 grew its children slow. Long winters, short seasons. You did not rush the ground. You waited and you tended, and when the frost came early, and it always came early, you had already counted on it. My first sparring match was against one of the unnamed late-arriving cadets, whose name I now knew was Pell. Pell was Myrathi, smaller framed than the twins but faster, with the sharp pivot step that Myrathi fighters use to redirect force instead of absorbing it. I knew this from the xenobiology file. I had flagged it on day 1. Knowing it and surviving it are two separate exercises. Pell pivoted around my guard in the first exchange before I finished raising it, caught me at the shoulder, and put me on the mat in a way that was technically clean and left zero room for complaint. I lay on the mat for 2 seconds, staring at the ceiling of the combat hall, doing a quick inventory of what hurt and why. Then I stood up. The second exchange lasted longer, not because I was faster, because I watched, during the brief reset, how Pell set her feet before the pivot. The right foot moved first always, by a fraction of a second that the eye skipped over if the eye was looking at her hands instead of her feet. I was looking at her feet. I did not beat Pell, but the second exchange lasted 11 seconds longer than the first, and I noted both numbers in the margin of my observation page that evening in the notation I used for information I was not done with yet. The Myrathi twins watched from the bench. The one who did most of the talking, I had named her Primary in my notes because their actual names were transliterated from a harmonic language, and the written versions looked like a diagram, said something to her sister in their own language. Their translator units were off. They had turned them off for the sparring session, which I noted as a habit worth examining. So won his first match against a first-year Vessi. It was not clean, but it was decisive, and when he came off the mat he was shaking slightly in the way that Thune do after high-exertion effort, a fine tremor in the secondary shoulder, joints that their biology uses to bleed excess energy. He sat next to me on the bench. "You lasted the second round," he said. "I lasted parts of it." Still, he was quiet for a moment. "Then, you were looking at her feet." I glanced at him. "You noticed that?" "I notice things too," he said it simply, without pride. "Back home I was the one in my unit who noticed things. It was not considered useful." "What was considered useful?" He held up his hands, which were half again as wide as mine. "These." I looked at his hands, looked at mine. "We may be in the wrong bodies for this academy." He made a sound that his translator rendered as a short exhale, but the shape of his face when he made it was unmistakably a laugh. The first one I had heard from him. It sat between us for a moment like something that had not expected to be there. On day 7, I watched Vale fight Dren in an informal sparring session before official training hours. I was running the conditioning circuit. I had added 2 voluntary laps per day, unlogged, purely because the unlogged laps were mine, when I passed the practice ring and saw them. I slowed. I did not stop running. I changed my circuit path so that I passed the practice ring 4 more times over the next 12 minutes. 4 passes, each one roughly 11 seconds of observation, 44 seconds of data on Vale in motion. It was enough. The left guard drop was there, exactly as I had first catalogued it. It happened when he vocalized, a short click burst that Keldris made during exertion, involuntary like clearing a throat. Every time the click came, the left guard dropped by 4 centimeters, for less than half a second. Half a second is nothing. Half a second is everything. I also confirmed on the third pass the thing I had suspected but not been certain of, the third thoracic joint in Keldris' exoskeletal structure. A narrow band of softer tissue between 2 overlapping plates, roughly at the mid-back, where the plates did not quite meet due to the species' extreme shoulder mobility. It was not a weakness in the fighting sense. It was a pressure point. In standard coalition hand-to-hand, a firm, accurate contact there would not injure, but it would register as a scoring touch under combat assessment rules. I had read this in a file. a xenoanatomy supplementary that was listed as optional reading in the pre-enrollment materials. I had read all the optional reading. I ran the rest of my unlogged laps, came back to the unit quarters, sat at my desk, and wrote 3 new pages of observations, not in the general notebook, in a separate one which I had labeled with no title because it did not need one. Some information you keep for a specific moment. You do not label that kind of information, you just know where it is. At the end of week 2, the unit combat ranking was posted. I was at the bottom, Vale was at the top. This surprised no one, including me. What I noted, quietly in the margin of that day's page, was that the gap between us was not the kind of gap that got smaller by getting faster. It was the kind of gap that got smaller by getting smarter, and by waiting for exactly the right moment to be smart in front of the right people. I was patient. Kepler Colony 7 had made me patient in the bone-deep way that only long winters can manage. Not patient like waiting for permission. Patient like a field that knows what month it is. I closed my notebook. I went to dinner at off-peak hours. I ate alone, which was fine, and then So came in 12 minutes later and sat across from me without asking, which was also fine. We ate in silence for a while, and then he said he had found a biomechanics text in the Academy library that covered Keldris joint structure and asked if I had read it. I told him I had read the one in the pre-enrollment optional materials. He was quiet for a moment. How much of the optional materials did you read? All of it. He looked at me across the table with an expression that his translator could not render but that I understood perfectly, because it was the same expression my grandmother made the first time she saw me recataloguing the seed stock at age 8 without being asked. Like she was revising something. Like whatever she had expected me to be, she was replacing it with something more accurate. Okay, So said. We finished dinner. He asked if I wanted to review the biomechanics text together in the common room after lights down. I said yes. We stayed up 2 hours past curfew, reading field analysis on species joint mechanics, speaking quietly, and I would describe it as studying, except it felt more like being 2 people in a cold place who have agreed to share a lantern. That was week 2. By week 4, I had 27 pages of unit observations. By week 6, I had stopped being afraid of the sparring schedule. Not because I was winning. I was not winning. I was losing with increasing specificity, which is different, and which is, if you are patient enough, the step that comes directly before something else. Outside the viewport in my bunk alcove, the cauldron system did its slow, indifferent rotation. I read until my eyes needed stopping. Then I closed them, and I thought about foot strikes and joint angles, and the sound a click burst makes in a Keldris throat before the left guard drops 4 centimeters for half a second. I thought about it until it was part of me. Then I slept. It started with a sound I recognized before I saw it. Not the sound of sparring. Sparring has a rhythm, 2 bodies negotiating distance, an almost musical quality to the pauses. What I heard coming from Sub-Hall C as I passed on my way back from the library was different. It had the rhythm of something that had already been decided. Impact and recovery. Impact and recovery. One-sided in a way that made my feet slow before my brain had finished the calculation. I stopped at the entrance. The sub-halls were practice spaces adjacent to the main combat complex. Smaller, less formal, used for voluntary drills, and I had learned within the first week, for the kind of sparring that was not logged anywhere because logging it would require explaining it. There were cadets watching, 8, maybe 9, spread along the walls in the posture of a crowd that knows it is watching something it should not and has decided to watch anyway. No one was talking. The translator murmur that filled most common spaces at the academy was absent. In the center of the room, So was on the mat. He was not down. He was still upright, still moving, still trying, which told me it had not been going on too long. But his left side was favoring, the secondary shoulder joint tracking wrong, and he was breathing in the sharp, pressured way that Thune breathe when they are managing pain and movement at the same time. Across from him, Vale. Vale's crest was lit gold, not blue, gold. I had not seen it gold before. I had read about it. Gold in Keldra's crestlight was the display color, the one that came on when a social position was being established. It was not aggression in the combat sense. It was something older than combat. It was performance. It was for the room. I understood in about 2 seconds what was happening. So had challenged something. A word, a rank comment, a small assertion of dignity that the unit hierarchy required him to answer and required Vale to answer back. The structure of it was in every species' social architecture somewhere, called different things, operating by different specific rules, but always the same underneath. The one with less status pushed back once, and then the one with more status demonstrated exactly why that was a miscalculation. The demonstration was almost over. I should have kept walking. I was aware of this as I stood in the entrance. The logical sequence of events from this point involved So going down, the watching cadets dispersing, no official record existing, So recovering over a week or two, the hierarchy reasserting itself, and me having learned a clear and practical lesson about what Varox Academy actually ran on under the official structure. I was aware of all of that. I walked in anyway. No speech, no announcement. I just walked across the edge of the mat space into the sight line of the room, and I stopped there. It took about 3 seconds for the shift to register. First in the watching cadets, a small collective reorientation toward me, the way a room's attention moves when something unexpected enters it. Then in So, who clocked me without losing his footing, a flicker of something in his expression that I was not going to examine right now. Then in Vale. He stopped the exchange, not because I was a threat. I want to be accurate about this. Vale was not afraid of me. Vale had never been afraid of anything in a room in his life, and I was not going to be the thing that changed that. He stopped because I had walked in and I was looking at him, and the quality of how I was looking at him was wrong. Not defiant, not angry, not the wide-eyed alarm of a cadet who has stumbled into something. Level, quiet, the way you look at a problem you have already spent 4 weeks working through. Vale looked back at me, the gold crestlight held. "You are in the wrong hall," he said. "I do not think I am," I said. The room went very still. "This is a private session," Vale said. "Leave." "I will," I said, "when the session ends." He turned toward me fully. 7 feet of Keldra's architecture, crest blazing gold, every line of him built for exactly this kind of moment. The watching cadets repositioned slightly. The math was obvious to everyone in the room. A human first year, a Keldra's top-ranked 3rd year. The gap was not the kind that drama closed. So moved to step back, giving me room or giving me an exit, I was not sure which. "So," I said without looking away from Vale, "you can stand down." So stopped moving. Vale looked at me with the particular expression of someone recalculating a variable they had dismissed. "You are going to challenge me," he said. It was not quite a question. "No," I said. He waited. "I am going to ask you to yield." Something shifted in the room at that word. The quality of the silence changed, which I had not thought was possible given how silent it already was. Yield was a formal word. In coalition combat protocol, it meant voluntary cessation with acknowledgement of the other party's standing. It was not the same as losing. Losing was a score. Yielding was a statement. Vale had never yielded to anyone at this academy. I had looked it up. "You cannot ask me to yield to you," Vale said. "You have no standing to ask it." "I am not asking you to yield to me," I said. "I am asking you to yield the match. The match is over. You have made your point. Yield the match and we all go to dinner." His crest light flickered just once, then steadied. I watched the flicker. I knew what it meant. It meant he was running the calculation, not the social one. He had already run that, the other one. The one that had started when he looked at my face and found it wrong. The one that was asking, what does she know that she is not saying? What has she been watching? How long has she been watching it? I kept my face level. I did not answer those questions for him. I let him sit with them. 4 seconds, 5. Vale looked at So, then back at me. The gold crest light dimmed very slowly back toward blue. He stepped off the mat. He did not yield with words. He did not have to. The step was the yield. The room understood it. I understood it. Most importantly, the watching cadets understood it, and the watching cadets were the point of the whole exercise. And that meant the exercise had just ended differently than anyone had scripted it. He walked past me toward the hall exit, and as he passed he said one word, low and basic, so only I could hear it. Interesting. Not a threat, not approval. The word you use when a variable does something the model did not predict. I watched him leave. Then I went to So. His left arm was at a wrong angle. Not broken. I had seen broken on Kepler Colony 7, and this was not that. But the joint was tracking wrong, inflamed, the kind of damage that needed the medical station and not a conversation. Can you walk? I asked. Yes, he said. Then why did you do that? I thought about the real answer. The real answer was that I had seen what happens when the soft ones go down, and no one steps into the space between them, and whatever is pressing them down. Because on Kepler Colony 7, we had watched Kepler 4 become a debris field one relay jump away. And the thing no one said, but everyone knew, was that the reason Kepler 4 was a debris field was not that they had been weak. It was that they had been alone. Let's get you to medical, I said instead. We walked out of Subhall C into the main corridor, and neither of us spoke, and the watching cadets who filed out behind us did not speak either. The silence followed us all the way to the medical station. It was not a comfortable silence. It was the silence of a room full of people who had just watched the math fail to work out the way they expected, and who were not yet sure what that meant, but who knew it meant something. I left So at the medical station door and told him I would see him at dinner. He looked at me for a moment. Clara. Yeah. Thank you. Don't, I said, not unkindly. I just stopped a match, that's all. He knew that was not all. I knew that was not all. We left it where it was. I went back to my bunk and sat at my desk, and I did not open my notebook. I sat with my hands flat on the desk surface, and I breathed slowly until the shakiness in my chest settled down into something manageable. I had not told anyone in that room that I was afraid. I had not been lying exactly. I had been afraid, and I had walked in anyway, which is the only useful thing you can do with fear on a colony world where the winters decide things for you, where the debris field of what used to be your neighbors is visible on clear nights, where every generation learns the same lesson in the same slow, grinding way. Being afraid does not exempt you from what needs doing. You do it afraid. You do it, and you do not explain it afterward. Outside my viewport, the cauldron system turned. I opened my notebook. I wrote one line on a new page. Then I closed it. Dinner was in 20 minutes. I had told So I would be there. I intended to keep that. The summons came at 6:15 the next morning, before training. A unit aide appeared at the door of my bunk alcove with a written order card, actual physical card, not a screen message, which meant it was coming from someone old enough or senior enough to consider physical cards the appropriate format for things that mattered, and handed it to me without making eye contact. I read it while still sitting on the edge of my bunk. Commandant Rivat, Senior Administration Block, 700. No other information, no stated reason, No guidance on whether I should be relieved or terrified, which meant I was both. I had time to wash my face, put my uniform in order, and eat exactly half a nutrition bar before I needed to leave. I ate the half bar standing at my desk, looking at my notebook without opening it. Then I put it in my bag because I was not leaving it unattended on the off chance. This meeting ended with my unit access revoked, and I went. The senior administration block was in the station's central core, separated from the cadet zones by 3 security checkpoints, and a shift in corridor material from standard composite to something darker and more permanent that absorbed sound differently. My footsteps disappeared into the floor. The effect was either calming or deeply ominous, depending on your situation, and I was not calm. I reported to the outer office at 6:58, 2 minutes early, which is the correct amount of early. At 7:02, I was shown in. Commandant Rival was Vessi. I had looked her up the night before because I look things up. 61 years standard, 4 decades of coalition service, 12 years as Varox Academy Commandant, which was 3 years longer than any previous holder of the position had served, and those previous holders had also been Vessi, which was not a coincidence but a tradition that the coalition did not officially sanction and also did not disturb. She had 4 arms, the 2 primary ones resting on the desk surface, the 2 secondary ones folded in the configuration that Vessi used for formal attention. Her coloring was deep green-gray, the kind that came with significant age in her species, and her eyes were gold-ringed amber that tracked me across the room with the undivided focus of someone who had made a career of reading cadets. She did not invite me to sit. "Cadet Fenn," she said. "Commandant, you intervened in an unlogged sparring session in Subhall C last evening." "Yes, Commandant." "You will tell me what you observed when you entered." It was not a question, so I did not treat it like one. I told her, precisely. So's positioning, the angle of the session, Vale's crest display, what I assessed from the body mechanics of both parties, what I said and what Vale said, and how it ended. She listened without expression. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You asked a third-year ranked cadet to yield." "Yes, Commandant." "On what basis?" "On the basis that the session was over, and he knew it, and stopping it by choice was better for everyone than the alternative." "The alternative being?" "The session continuing until So went down, which was 30 to 40 seconds away at the pace it was running, at which point So would have needed medical attention regardless, and Vale would have made his point in front of a room full of witnesses, and the record of what happened would be whatever story the room agreed on afterward." Ravaz's expression did not change. Her secondary arms shifted slightly. "You are describing a social enforcement mechanism," she said. "Yes, Commandant." "And you intervened in it?" "Yes, Commandant." "Why?" And here it was, the real question, the one she had been moving toward since I walked in, and I had known it was coming, and I had thought about it since 400 when I woke up and could not go back to sleep. I could give her the clean answer, the protocol answer. I witnessed a cadet being harmed and I acted to prevent further harm, which was consistent with Coalition Academy Conduct Codes, Section 7, Paragraph 3. I gave her the true answer instead, because she had the kind of eyes that would know the difference, and giving a person with those eyes the clean answer is an insult to both of you. Because I was the only person in that room with nothing to lose, I said. I have no unit rank. I have no social standing in the cohort hierarchy. I have no crest display color that changes when I am challenged. I have no status that could be damaged by stepping in. Every other cadet in that room had something to protect. I just had myself, and I was the only one who could afford to move. Rivat looked at me for a long moment. "Sit down, Cadet Fenn." I sat. She was quiet for another moment, and in that quiet I became aware that this conversation had turned into something different from what I had prepared for. It was not a reprimand. It was not an inquiry in the formal sense. It was something more like an evaluation, and the parameters of it had just shifted. "You received the Frontier Scholarship," Reva said. "Yes, Commandant." "Do you know who created it?" "No, Commandant. I assumed the Academy administration." "The Academy administration filed the paperwork," she said. "The scholarship was proposed to this office 7 months ago by a coalition research group studying human adaptive performance in high-variance environments. They had been tracking data from colony populations for 6 years. Academic outcomes, crisis response patterns, resource optimization under constraint. A pause. "You are the most recent data point in a study that has been running since before you were accepted here." The room was very quiet around those words. I sat with them. The feeling that moved through me was not simple. It was layered in the way of things that are several things at once and do not resolve into one. The top layer was something sharp and cold, because being a data point is a specific kind of thing to be, and I had come here thinking I was a person who had earned a place. And a data point and a person are not the same even when they occupy the same body. Underneath that, something I was less willing to name, something that felt like a pressure releasing, like a held breath, like the specific relief of finding out there was a reason, even if the reason was not the one you would have chosen. I was not here by accident. Someone had calculated that I belonged here before I had to prove it to anyone, including myself. I was not proud of how much that mattered to me. I did not pretend it did not. "The study is observational," Reva continued. "You are not being directed. Your actions are your own. But your placement here was intentional, and I am informing you of that because you are entitled to the information, and because I believe you had already suspected it." I said. And I am still here," I said. "Whatever the reason I was placed here, I am still the one doing the work. The observations are mine. The decisions are mine. The moment in Subhall C was mine. No one handed me that." I stopped. Then, quieter, "I would just prefer going forward to be told things directly." Reva looked at me for a long moment. "Noted," she said. She folded her primary hands on the desk in a way that signaled a shift in register, closing something and opening something else. "There have been 3 prior incidents this semester of junior cadets being handled outside official channels, all within Unit 6's cohort. None reported, none logged." Her amber eyes held mine. "Yours is the first that produced a visible outcome, specifically, the yielding of a senior cadet in front of 9 witnesses." "I did not plan the witnesses," I said. "No," she said, "but they were there. And what they witnessed is now part of the Academy's social record, whether or not it appears in any official document." A pause. "Do you understand what that means?" I thought about it. The 9 cadets who had watched, the way the silence had followed us out, the look on the faces of the Myrathi twins when I passed them in the corridor an hour later, the slight recalibration in how they tracked me. "It means the math changed," I said. "It means the math changed," she agreed. She dismissed me at 7:48. I walked back through the administration block corridors, my footsteps disappearing into the sound-absorbent floor, and I thought about data points and doors, and the specific weight of being both at the same time. So found me outside the block entrance. His left arm was in a joint stabilizer, pale blue, the Academy medical kit's standard color. He was leaning against the corridor wall with the patience of someone who had been waiting long enough to get comfortable about it. "Well," he said. "I am not expelled," I said. He made the exhale laugh. "What else?" I thought about what Reva had told me. The study, the scholarship, the 7 years of data collection. The word she had not said but that I had heard underneath everything she did say, the word that described what I was supposed to be for everyone who came after me. "Nothing that changes anything today," I said. He accepted that. We walked to the training hall together, his stabilizer clicking softly with each step, and I matched my pace to his without making it a thing. And outside in the Cauldron system, the stars did their indifferent rotation, and I thought about doors. How heavy they are. How long they take to open. How you only know they were doors after you have already walked through. The final combat assessment was posted 11 days before the end of the academy year. Individual scoring, ranked matches. Each cadet in Unit 6 was assigned 2 assessment opponents, their results contributing to final placement. The pairings were determined by the unit combat instructor, logged by the academy system, reviewed and confirmed by Commandant's office. My first assigned opponent was Pell. My second was Vale. I read the posting 3 times, not because I misread it, because I wanted to be sure I had read it correctly, and I wanted those 3 readings to be the last 3 times I thought about what it meant, because thinking about it was not useful and what I needed now was not more thinking. I had been thinking for 8 months. I had 27 pages of observation notes, a separate unlabeled notebook, 460 unlogged voluntary conditioning laps, and the biomechanics of Keldris joint structure memorized to a level that would have been excessive if I had not been assigned to fight one. The pairing was not accidental. I was aware of that. Reva had told me I would be told things directly. She had not told me this directly, but the posting was direct enough. The study wanted its replication event. The research group that had been watching human adaptive performance for 6 years wanted to see what the most recent data point did when the conditions of Subhall C were replicated under official scoring parameters, with a full unit cohort watching. Fine. I went to So's bunk that evening. His stabilizer was off. The joint had healed cleanly, which the medical staff said was faster than projected, and So said was because he had a good reason to be in a hurry. We sat on opposite ends of his bunk with the biomechanics text between us, and I told him about the posting. He was quiet for a moment. Vale has not lost a scored match, he said. I know. In 3 years. I know. You know things about him, So said carefully. It was not quite a question. Yes. Are the things you know enough? I thought about the honest answer. No, I said, not by themselves. He waited. But they do not have to be enough by themselves, I said. They have to be enough combined with everything else. The conditioning, the reaction mapping, the footstrike adjustment, the 12 assessment matches I have run this semester where I have been losing in ways that taught me exactly how each opponent moves. I stopped. I am not going to beat him in the first exchange or the second, possibly not the 5th. But I have been watching him for 8 months, and he has not been watching me at all, and that is a gap that does not close in his favor just because he is stronger and faster. So was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, on my homeworld there is a word for the kind of hunting that does not end. Yes, I said, we have that too. I went back to my bunk and I slept well, which surprised me, and I think the reason I slept well was that the waiting was over. 8 months of watching and nodding and adjusting and being last and filing things away for a specific moment. That period had ended. What came next was either going to work or it was not, and either way I would stop carrying the weight of not knowing. The match against Pell came first, on assessment day 1. I won. Not cleanly, not easily. The first exchange went a Pell on a pivot that I had mapped but still moved a half-second too late to intercept. The second exchange went to me on a counter that used her pivot momentum against her, redirecting instead of absorbing, and she scored it in her face before she'd finished her own motion. The specific look of someone who knows what just happened and is recalibrating. The third exchange I took on points. The fourth was called in my favor when Pell's foot came off the mat boundary. Final score, Finn, Clara over Pell split on points 3-2. The room did not react dramatically. The cadets watching logged the result and moved on, because there were other matches to track. But I caught the look that passed between the Myrathi twins, Primary and her sister, and it was not the look from month 1. Month 1 had been, what is this data point doing here? This was closer to, we may have underestimated the data point. Day 2, my second assessment match. The hall was full. Not unusually full in terms of official attendance, but the cadets who could be there without being out of place were there, which was most of the unit cohort, plus a scattering of second and third years whose presence I noted and did not dwell on. The scoring table had 2 instructors and an adjudicator. Rival was not present. The system she had put in motion was present, which is a different thing and a more significant one. Vale and I stood at opposite edges of the mat. His crest light was blue, controlled, calibrated. He was not performing for the room the way he had in Sub-Hall C. This was not a social demonstration. This was a scored match under Academy protocol, and Vale, whatever else he was, had not reached the top of this unit's ranking by treating anything sloppily. He looked at me across the mat. I looked back. Neither of us said anything. The adjudicator called the start. The first exchange lasted 4 seconds and I lost it. He was exactly as fast as I had mapped him and marginally faster in the opening move than my reconstruction had projected, which cost me the first exchange, and also confirmed the projection's margin of error, which I filed away for immediate use. Second exchange. 9 seconds. I pushed the engagement longer than he expected, because he had set his internal clock to my projected pace from my previous scored matches, and I ran this exchange 2 beats slower than my actual rhythm, and he overcommitted to a closing move that I slipped left of, and the slip cost him a point. His crest light did not change, but I felt the quality of his attention shift. Good. Third exchange. 12 seconds. I was hurting. A contact in the second exchange had caught my right shoulder at an angle that was going to be a problem if the match ran long. I rolled the shoulder once during the reset, cataloged the pain level, assigned it a number, put it away. Pain has a number. You note the number and you keep moving. This is not bravery. This is management. He scored the third exchange on a combination that was technically perfect, and that I had known was coming and still could not intercept cleanly, because knowing what is coming and having the physical tools to stop it are, once again, 2 separate exercises. Score Vale 2 Fen 1. The room was watching. I could feel it the way you feel whether, a collective held breath that had been held since the match started. Fourth exchange. He came in faster. He was adjusting. He had run his own calculations during the third reset and concluded that slower was costing him, and he was right, and the adjustment was correct, and it was also exactly what I had needed him to do. Because faster meant the click burst came earlier. The involuntary vocalization. The one that dropped the left guard 4 centimeters for half a second. Under normal pace, the click came mid-exchange after the closing move, when the guard drop cost nothing. Under fast pace, it came during the opening, before the guard was fully established. I heard it. The left guard dropped. I did not go for the guard. I went for the third thoracic joint. Firm contact, 2 fingers, accurate to within the margin I had been refining in my head for 4 months. It registered on the scoring system as a clean touch. Vale's movement stopped, not in pain, not in damage, in the very specific arrest of a body that has just been touched in a place it did not know it could be reached. Half a second. The adjudicator marked the point. Score Vale 2 Fen 2. The room exhaled. Vale looked at me across the reset distance. His crest light was still blue, but it had the quality of blue that is working very hard to stay blue. His compound eyes were completely still in a way that meant the opposite of stillness. The thoracic joint, he said, very quietly and basic. Not accusation, something else. Something that was nearly, in whatever Keldris expression looked like, recognition. Optional reading, I said, just as quietly. Fifth exchange. He adapted. He moved differently, compensating for the guard, sealing the thoracic approach, fighting a version of me that knew what it knew. It was good adaptation. It was fast adaptation. It was the adaptation of someone at the top of their unit ranking for reasons that were not arbitrary. He took the fifth exchange on a clean combination that I did not have an answer to. Score Veil 3 Fen 2. Sixth exchange. My shoulder was a problem. I was running on the far edge of what my conditioning could carry, and I knew it, and Vale knew it, and the room knew it, and the math was not comfortable. I thought about Kepler Colony 7, about short seasons and long winters, about my grandmother cataloging seeds in the autumn not because she expected disaster, but because it always came anyway and you wanted the record. About the debris field visible on clear nights that used to be a colony and was now a lesson that nobody had asked to teach. About endurance hunters and apex predators, and the difference that a weapons instructor had named in week 2, not knowing they were nomming the only thing I had actually brought to this academy. I did not stop. Sixth exchange. 51 seconds, the longest of the match. I kept him moving, kept him adjusting, kept him spending energy on recalculation because I was not fighting a pattern he could finish mapping. The contact I was looking for was not the thoracic joint again. He had sealed it. But the secondary opportunity that appeared when the sealing motion overextended his right side by the 11-degree margin I had cataloged on Thune in training, and confirmed on Keldris anatomy in the biomechanics text so had found. 11 degrees for 3/4 of a second. His right flank open. 1 point. Score Veil 3 Fen 3. Seventh exchange. The adjudicator would call the match on the next point or on time limit, whichever came first. Time limit was 90 seconds from the start of the exchange. Veil looked at me. I looked at him. He was breathing. Not hard, not the way I was breathing, not managing a number assigned to a shoulder, but breathing in a way I had not seen from him before, with effort. With the cost of 7 exchanges against an opponent he had not finished mapping. He came in clean, no tells. He had suppressed the click burst. He had sealed every approach I had used. He was fighting from pure trained instinct and physical advantage, and those two things were real and they were significant and they were not enough. They were not enough because I had one more thing in the notebook I had never used. The foot. In the third circuit lap on day 7 of the first month, passing the practice ring at the biomechanically optimal angle for observation, I had noticed that Vale's right foot carried weight 2 centimeters too far forward at the apex of his closing move. It was not a flaw in his technique. It was a body-specific habit, the kind that develops over years of training and becomes invisible, because it never costs anything against opponents who cannot reach the closing move without giving up position first. I could reach the closing move. I had spent 7 exchanges teaching him exactly how I moved so that the closing move was where he committed. He committed. His right foot came forward, 2 centimeters, apex of the move. I stepped inside it instead of back from it. Contact his momentum, my redirect. His foot slipped the mat boundary by 4 centimeters. The adjudicator's marker sounded. Score Fen 4, Veil 3. Match called. The room was completely silent. I stood at the center of the mat, breathing, shoulder reporting the number I had assigned it, which was a 7, and I was going to have words with that number later. The scoring table was recording. The adjudicator was marking the final result. The watching cadets were standing in the particular stillness of people who are in the middle of revising something large. Vale was still on the mat. He looked at me for a long time. Then he did something I had not projected in any of my models, which meant it was real and not performance. He lowered his crest. Not submission, not deference. the specific Keldris gesture for acknowledging a thing that was true. He did not speak. He walked off the mat. I stood where I was for another moment. Then I walked off the mat too, and so was at the edge of the space, stabilizer long gone, both hands gripping each other in the way Thune do when they are very carefully not making a visible reaction, and I walked up to him and said, quietly, "You can make the reaction." He made the reaction, which was a sound that started in his chest and came out as something enormous and delighted and entirely undignified, and several nearby cadets flinched, and I put my good hand on his arm and started laughing, which I had not done in a very long time. It lasted about 10 seconds. Then we composed ourselves and walked toward the exit together, and I was already thinking about dinner, and whether my shoulder was going to need the medical station, and whether the report to Rivaz's office would be filed today or tomorrow. Practical things. The only things that were mine to do next. That evening in my bunk alcove, I opened the unlabeled notebook for the last time. On the final page, I wrote one line, not a note, not an observation, just the colony word my grandmother had used for people who became the thing the threat did not see coming, written in her handwriting that I had practiced until it was also mine. I had given that word to Vale in the corridor after Sub-Hall C, quietly, so only he heard it. He had not understood it. He never would, without the winters, without the debris field visible on clear nights, without the specific kind of patience you grow in places that decide things for you. That was fine. Some things are not for everyone. They are for the people who needed them to survive, and then for everyone who comes after, because surviving is only half of it. The other half is making sure the door stays open behind you. I closed the notebook. I looked at the intake manifest on my screen. Next year's first class, 3 human names in the list, colony designations next to 2 of them, one from Kepler 9, one from a station colony near the Caldris relay. They had no idea what they were walking into. I thought about writing them something, a note, a guide, the 27 pages of field observations, the unlabeled notebook, all of it. I decided against it. What I had learned by doing it in the specific conditions of this year, and conditions change, and what they were going to need was not my notes. What they were going to need was the knowledge that someone had been here first, and the door was open, and the math was different now than it had been. That was enough. That was the whole thing, actually. I set the screen down. I closed my eyes. Outside the viewport above my bunk, the Caldris system turned in its slow, enormous way, indifferent and beautiful, full of stars that did not care what any of us were or what we had done or how hard it had been. I have always found that comforting. It means the work was yours. All of it. Every step. Yours.